Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're diving into a listener request, McCarthy Beach State Park in Minnesota. And wow, you weren't kidding about wanting a deep dive. You've given us articles, videos, even a whole podcast episode about it. Sounds like someone's ready for an adventure. I even pack a picnic basket.
It's an interesting mix of material, that's for sure. We've got articles on the area's logging history, a scientific paper on glacial moraines, even a YouTube video of someone's first camping trip there. It's clear you're interested not just in the what of this park, but the why. Its history, the science behind it, what makes it special for visitors.
The whole picture, I like it. You mentioned wanting to start with the history first, so how about we rewind the clock? It might surprise you to learn that McCarthy Beach wasn't always, a haven for nature lovers. Back in the late 19th century, it was actually a busy hub for the Swan River Logging Company. They even went so far as to build a railroad to Sturgeon Lake just to transport logs down to Minneapolis sawmills.
It really is hard to imagine now, looking at photos of the park, how peaceful and serene it is. But for a time, McCarthy Beach was a whirlwind of industry. And that logging history, believe it or not, is still visible today, if you know where to look, that is.
Okay, so how does a logging town transform into the tranquil state park it is today? What sparked that change?
Well, it seems the locals, they always had a deep appreciation for this land, even during that industrial phase. As the logging industry started to move on in the early 20th century, people from the Iron Range communities, they continued to use the area for picnics, for camping. You gave us this fascinating article, actually, that shows photos from that era. Families gathered by the lake, kids fishing off the docks. It became the spot to unwind, connect with nature.
Their retreat.
Exactly.
So how did it officially become McCarthy Beach State Park?
So in 1943, when the then owner, John A. McCarthy, passed away, his daughter decided to sell the land. And her initial offer, well, it went to a lumberman. Yeah, understandably, this caused quite a stir among the locals. It would have been a return to, McCarthy Beach's industrial past.
Oh no, that sounds like classic Save Our Park energy.
Exactly. The community, they rallied together, they held bake sales, organized fundraisers. They even went door to door collecting donations.
Wow.
And they managed to raise enough money to purchase the land, then worked with the state to designate it as a state park. By 1945, McCarthy Beach officially became a public recreation area. Talk about small-town hero energy. It's really inspiring.
It is. That story reminds me of a time when our community came together to save a local park from being turned into a shopping mall. There's just something so powerful about people uniting to protect a place they love,
Absolutely. It speaks to that deep connection we have with nature, and how important it is to have places like McCarthy Beach, places where we can escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life.
Speaking of escaping into nature, I have to ask about the wildlife. You sent over some info about black bears and timber wolves?
And chipmunks, red squirrels, even raccoons brave enough to steal snacks from unsuspecting campers.
Those bandits.
But yes, you're right. Black bears and timber wolves are residents of McCarthy Beach State Park. And while they generally try to avoid humans, they are a vital part of this ecosystem.
It's kind of fascinating to think about these creatures roaming the same forests and shorelines that visitors enjoy. It really adds an element of wildness to the experience, But you mentioned chipmunks and raccoons too, so it's not all apex predators.
Right. You also mentioned being fascinated by birds, and with over 175 species spotted here, McCarthy Beach is a birdwatcher's paradise. We were particularly intrigued by this article about the common loon's comeback in the area. It had nearly disappeared because of habitat loss from all that logging we talked about, but it's a testament to the park's recovery and a fascinating story in itself.
This place sounds incredible. You've definitely piqued my interest. But let's talk about the lay of the land. What makes McCarthy Beach geographically unique?
We know you're interested in geology, and McCarthy Beach has quite the story to tell. So, this peaceful landscape we see today, it was once a fiery scene. Millions of years ago, basaltic lava flows, similar to what you see in Hawaii today, created the foundation of this area. Then, imagine massive glaciers carving through this volcanic landscape during the last glacial period, which ended around 10,000 years ago.
Volcanoes in Minnesota, who knew?
Right. And those glaciers, they sculpted the valleys and those unique formations called moraines. Essentially, they're piles of rock and debris left behind by the retreating ice. Some of those valleys eventually filled with water, forming the lakes we see today. So when you see those hills and lakes at McCarthy Beach, you're literally looking at land shaped by volcanic activity and carved by glaciers millions of years ago. It's like a geological time capsule.
That's incredible. I always find it amazing how these ancient forces have shaped the landscapes we know and love today. Speaking of landscapes, one of the things that struck me from the materials you sent is just how naturally beautiful McCarthy Beach seems to be.
The sources are definitely full of glowing descriptions, that's for sure. Crystal clear waters, towering pines, a sense of peace that just washes over you. You even included a video titled Golden Hour at McCarthy Beach that showcases these stunning sunset views over the lake.
Okay, now you're just making me want to book a trip immediately. It does sound idyllic. But let's move beyond the scenery for a moment. You also included a link to a YouTube video. First time camping in McCarthy Beach State Park.
Yes, that video, it offers such a wonderful glimpse into what it's actually like to spend time in the park, It's told from the perspective of a Filipina immigrant living in Minnesota, experiencing this slice of Minnesotan nature for the very first time.
And she chose McCarthy Beach for her first camping trip. I love that. What were some of her highlights?
Her enthusiasm is contagious. You can really feel her excitement about simply being there, Pitching her tent, building a campfire, waking up to the sounds of nature. She was especially excited about, oh, this is great. She was kayaking on the lake and saw a bald eagle fly overhead.
Wow, now that's a memory she'll never forget.
Exactly. And it's a good reminder that beyond the scenic beauty, McCarthy Beach has all these incredible opportunities to connect with wildlife in a really tangible way.
Speaking of connections, one thing that struck me about her video was how often she interacted with other people. She mentioned playing hide and seek with some kids at a nearby campsite and even shared some of her Filipino barbecue with a family fishing by the lake. It looked delicious.
That's such a great observation. It really reinforces this idea that state parks like McCarthy Beach aren't just about, individual experience in nature. They're also about fostering a sense of community and shared stewardship.
Right. It's that classic summer camp vibe. But for all ages, we get so caught up in the day-to-day, it's easy to forget how good it feels to just be present with other people, sharing a meal, telling stories around a campfire.
And often those shared experiences, they revolve around a love for the place itself.
Which brings us back to McCarthy Beach. You mentioned that this YouTuber camped at Beatrice Lake Campground. What can you tell us about the facilities and amenities there?
Her video actually provides some great insights into that. She gives us this little mini tour of her campsite. It includes a fire pit, a picnic table, designated parking, and there's nearby access to drinking water and restrooms. Plus, there's a convenience store just a short drive from the park for any last-minute supplies. So it seems to strike a nice balance between being immersed in nature, but also having some essential comforts.
That's good to know. Not all of us are cut out for fully off-the-grid adventures. So we've covered the history, the wildlife, the range of activities. Are there any downsides to visiting McCarthy Beach? Any potential challenges or things visitors should be aware of before planning a trip?
That's a great question. It's easy to get swept up in the beauty and tranquility of it all, but it's always wise to be prepared. One thing that stood out in our research is the importance of, booking a campsite in advance.
Because they fill up quickly, especially during peak season.
Exactly. The YouTuber in that video actually mentioned that Beatrice Lake Campground was fully booked when she first tried to make her reservation. She ended up having to reserve several weeks in advance to secure her spot.
Wow, so planning ahead is essential.
Absolutely. And it's always a good idea to check the park's website or even contact the visitor center for the latest updates on trail conditions, any potential closures, and any permit requirements for activities like fishing.
Speaking of being prepared, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the potential for encounters with wildlife.
Right. We already touched on the presence of black bears and timber wolves. And while they generally try to avoid humans, it's essential for visitors to follow park guidelines regarding food storage and be aware of their surroundings, especially when hiking or camping. And don't forget those mischievous squirrels. They are notorious for snatching snacks.
So we're talking bear-proof canisters, keeping food out of tents, maybe avoiding those peanut butter sandwiches.
Exactly. Better safe than sorry, especially when it comes to sharing space with wildlife. But shifting gears a bit, I think it's time we talk about McCarthy Beach in a broader context.
Okay, let's connect those dots. What makes this park significant within the larger ecosystem of northern Minnesota?
One key factor is its location. It's within the vast circumpolar boreal forest biome. This biome stretches across the northern latitudes of North America, Europe, and Asia. And these forests, they're dominated by coniferous trees like pines and spruce, and they play such a crucial role. They regulate global climate, and they support these unique plant and animal communities.
So it's not just a pretty park, it's part of a globally significant ecosystem.
Exactly. And that means the plants and animals found at McCarthy Beach, well, they're part of a complex web of life that extends far beyond the park's boundaries.
Like those 175 bird species we mentioned earlier, they're likely just a fraction of the biodiversity found within this entire biome.
You're exactly right. Many of those birds are migratory. They rely on habitats like those found at McCarthy Beach for nesting, feeding, and resting during their long journeys. So protecting places like McCarthy Beach isn't just about preserving a local treasure. It's about contributing to the health of a much larger ecosystem.
It really highlights that interconnectedness that you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely. And it emphasizes how important it is to understand how human activities can impact these delicate balances, both locally and globally.
Speaking of impacts, we've talked about the park's logging past. But are there any ongoing environmental concerns that are being addressed at McCarthy Beach?
That's a really important question. While we don't have specifics from your research about initiatives directly at McCarthy Beach, there are some broader environmental challenges facing the Northwoods that are relevant to the park's management.
For example?
Well, as with many natural areas around the world, climate change is a significant concern. Changes in temperature and precipitation patterns can impact everything from flora composition to water levels in the lakes.
And then there's the ever-present issue of invasive species.
Absolutely. Invasive plants and animals can outcompete native species for resources, disrupt food webs, even alter habitats.
So even a place as seemingly pristine as McCarthy Beach isn't immune to these larger environmental issues.
That's right. But the good news is that awareness is often the first step toward finding solutions. And organizations like the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources are actively involved in researching, monitoring, and implementing conservation strategies to address these challenges.
So there's hope for the future of McCarthy Beach.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between, enjoying these natural spaces and ensuring their preservation for generations to come.
And that's where responsible recreation comes in.
Exactly. By being mindful of our impact, staying informed about potential threats, and supporting conservation efforts, we can all play a role in protecting places like McCarthy Beach.
It's inspiring to know that even in the face of these challenges, there are people working hard to protect these natural treasures.
It really is. And it circles back to what we were saying earlier about, the power of community. It takes a collective effort to safeguard these special places.
This entire conversation has what's made me realize I need to plan a Minnesota road trip, and soon.
You absolutely should. And if you're already planning a trip to McCarthy Beach, you're in luck. It turns out Minnesota has a surprisingly extensive and diverse park system with 75 state parks and recreation areas.
75, that's incredible. I had no idea there were so many.
Right. And you mentioned being drawn to lakes and forests. Well, you could easily spend weeks exploring just those types of landscapes within the state park system. There's something for everyone, really.
So McCarthy Beach is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to experiencing Minnesota's natural beauty.
Exactly. And that's one of the things I love most about these deep dives, honestly. We start with a specific place, but then through exploring your research and interests, we uncover all these fascinating threads that lead to a broader understanding of a region, its history, its ecological significance.
It's like opening a door to a whole new world of exploration.
Precisely. And for you, dear listener, we hope this deep dive has not only given you a newfound appreciation for McCarthy Beach, but also sparked a curiosity to discover more of Minnesota's natural wonders.
Maybe even pack a picnic basket and see if you can spot that elusive loon, or catch a glimpse of the northern lights dancing across a star-filled sky.
Until next time, keep exploring.